feedback on where you are. So if you don't mind just dropping in the chat where you're joining from today, whether you're on LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, wherever you are, or here on Crowdcast where we're broadcasting from, please drop in the chat where you're from. So I'm excited for today's discussion. Today's discussion, we are going to focus on business process mining, which I am really fascinated by. Don't know a ton about it, but I hope that changes here today after today's discussion. And I feel like it's one of those areas that is an underestimated, underutilized aspect of digital transformation. And even organizations that maybe aren't sure if they need a digital transformation, I think there's a lot of upside potential to leverage process mining to optimize what you might already have. So that being said, let's jump into the introduction. And by the way, after we get through the introduction here, if you have questions too, I'm going to start off with a bunch of questions to get us going, but I encourage you actually to ask any questions you have along the way. Just drop them in the chat as you think of them, and we'll get to them as soon as possible. And again, if you don't mind dropping in the chat right now, where are you joining us from? Where in the world are you today? We'd love to get a feel for our audience here today. So all that being said, I want to introduce Wayne Holtham, who's the VP of Third Stage's Asia Pacific office in Brisbane, Australia. And it is super early in Brisbane right now. It's 4 a.m., right? Right, Wayne? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
I thought it was 5 a.m., and so I didn't feel quite as bad until you told me, no, it's actually 4 o'clock here. And then I felt pretty bad that you're joining us here so early. But I really appreciate you being here. But Wayne, thanks for joining today.
No, it's my pleasure. It's great to be back.
Absolutely. You've been on the show here a few times, and you always have interesting case studies and real life examples to talk through here. Why don't you tell us just a little bit about yourself before we jump in?
I've been around the digital transformation space for probably last, as you can see, 20, 30 years sort of thing. It's about change and about getting people to be able to adopt process and to do things in a consistent way. So that's important to me, and it's one of probably the areas I find a real lot of benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and that's the topic at hand today is business process mining. Maybe just to start then, help us understand what exactly is business process mining.
It's probably the 21st century's way to understand how well we do process. So many times we'll ask people, and people will go, we do it this way, and we assume that they're right. But we don't ask everybody. And so the value of process mining allows us to be able to sort of look into what actually happens and how many different ways it happens. And so that's the different paradigm, I suppose. So you're able to be able to look deeply into process and then work out what you need to do to get consistency or improve. Yeah.
Okay. So maybe let's build on that a little bit. Is business process mining a framework? Is it a tool? Is it a manual process where you analyze different processes? Maybe help us understand just at the most fundamental level, what exactly is it, or how do you go about that at a high level?
Well, there's tools there that allow you to tap into the data and have a look at it. I suppose Third Stage has proposed and perfected a framework that allows you to be able to take that information, that intelligence you have, and then work through what do we have, how do we solve it, what does good look like, how do we measure it.
Okay. And so what about when we think about business process improvement, that's a discipline that's been around for a long time, and you've had disciplines like Lean Six Sigma that have focused on measuring processes and continuous improvement and continuously optimizing business processes and operations. How is business process mining different from those other sort of business process methodologies like process improvement, process management, Six Sigma, that sort of stuff?
Well, previously you never had the ability to see what was actually happening. It's like the crystal ball. So you always worked on processes based on how people told you they were doing it. Whereas today you can actually say, here is actually how you're doing it. And I can see how many other gaps are in our processes. Yeah. And the one thing that's important is it's not only how the process is done, it's the things that stop the process from being done. So many times we find we build workarounds and do those sort of things, and that leads to that process creep or inconsistency. Whereas this allows you to point those out and you can actually rectify those. So it could be master data, it could be just different workflows. It's a number of different areas. Yeah.
Okay. And is it typically something that you would do within a certain functional area or department or a certain system, or is it meant to be more of an end-to-end business process flow or analysis of what's actually happening with your end-to-end processes, or is it mixable?
It's largely end-to-end, and I think that's the real value to it. Many organizations get caught into the silo-based processes or business unit style process, whereas if you actually look at it end-to-end, that's where you get the value drivers and you can measure performance. And that's where value comes for the business, when you're actually improving and getting consistency. Yeah.
Okay. And does that also apply, does that end-to-end mindset with process mining, does that also apply to multiple systems? So if I have multiple ERP systems, or I have a financial and accounting system and a separate CRM and a separate manufacturing, can I do process mining across systems, or do I need to, am I limited by what systems I might already have in place?
No, the tools today are actually very advanced. So you could have a whole landscape of tools. It could be a CRM, could be a HCM of best of breed, and you can actually pick the process and then also identify where they interact with each of those platforms. So really, really deep into the end-to-end process piece, no matter what technology you've bolted together or got architecture that supports that.
Okay. So it can really cut across any system or systems that are touching the process. You would be able to sort of capture and analyze what's actually happening with those.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Okay. So what, I guess if you do this process mining process, maybe help us understand. Let's just say I'm just starting the process mining process. Not to be redundant with that word process. I feel like I'm going to keep doing that through this discussion. But when we're going through that process, I'm just getting started on it for my organization, end-to-end process. What do I do? Like, what does it look like in terms of how do I use the software, or how does it collect data to help me see the visibility into what's actually happening with my processes?
Well, the software has a number of pre-built connectors, and so those connectors will tap into the database and pick up the tables in the background that house the transactional data. And so you extract that, and then the process mining tool does the evaluation, and that's where you start to get the depth of knowledge that you're looking for. Yeah, and many times you'll start with one process. The best is probably a value driver process. So one that, if it's not done well, it's costing money, costing time, those sorts of things. And so that's probably where the best part is to start out. Then you start seeing the value, and you can actually, by carrying out those improvements, you're actually paying yourself back for the cost of actually doing the work. Yeah.
Yeah, just in the amount of inefficiency and broken processes you've identified using those tools.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
Okay. So if I'm an end user, I'm on the front line, and I'm actually one of the people executing these business processes that we're mining. Do I know that process mining tool is there, or am I just sort of business as usual, and in the background it's sort of capturing how data is flowing to me, onto the next person, and on the next person after that?
It's in the background. You don't even see it's happening. It does allow you, if you take the advanced process mining, where it can actually advise you as a user, if you're not doing the process right, it will give you the ways that the process should be done, or it will provide you options to be able to, follow up on things that you need to do. So if your accounts payable, accounts receivable, and you've got someone who's overdue, or those sorts of things, you can actually get a warning, an alert, and say you need to follow this up, and this person's overdue, or there's a bonus about to be paid, so you need to process that vendor as it is, sort of thing. So it's quite powerful in the advanced part, but we're talking early about the evaluation piece. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So when I use this process mining tool, or a process mining tool, to analyze my end-to-end processes, It's in the background. People are executing their processes as they would day to day. It's capturing data behind the scenes in the tables to help us analyze and understand where the what the speed or velocity of process flow is and where the bottlenecks are, where the breakdowns are. What sort of dashboard or end result do I get out of the system, out of the process mining tool, to be able to see what's happening? I mean, what does it look like, or how would you explain that to someone who's never seen sort of what that would look like on the business process mining tool itself?
Well, you start off with the linear process, end-to-end process. So if you took a procurement, you'd have a purchase rec, purchase order, you receive an invoice, goods receipt, and you'd see the linear process. And when you actually start evaluating, you start to see where the differences are. So you might get to the point where you're starting a process down an invoice receipt. And so that's a warning sign as such, because you're actually purchasing without a purchase order. You don't know what your spend's going to be, and it's maverick buying as such. And so that allows people to be able to go, well, why is our process not right? You might find the other area is where we're changing prices. So we've got a purchase order. We may have an agreed price, and we send it to the vendor, and they come back and say the price needs to change. And that could be a master data issue, or it could be a vendor is not following the price catalog that they have. So you can see you can fix lots of different areas as against just the standard process. Yeah.
So it's sort of back to that question about how it ties into business process improvement methodologies. So it gives you the analytics or the data or the knowledge or insights to be able to see that there's a problem there in that process where, with that purchasing process you described or the PO process you described, and therefore I can now go to some root cause analysis to figure out why are people doing it that way? Is it a training issue? Is it a system issue or whatever?
Exactly right. And it allows you to drill down to every variant that you have across that whole end-to-end process. So there could be 100, 200 different variants of the ways people follow through that process.
Okay. Interesting. So a company with like 10,000 employees, let's just say, you could have theoretically 10,000 or maybe even more different processes or different ways that people are doing different jobs within the same functions.
Oh, exactly right. And the other benefit is that if you've got different divisions, you can actually benchmark against the divisions. And so you can see where the high performers are and the ones that are actually following a process and others that are having issues or inconsistency in their process. And so you can start to improve against each other. It's really powerful.
Is the reporting an analytical tool set as far as just slicing and dicing what you see or what you're analyzing from the process mining tools? Is it pretty powerful, or does it require a fair amount of human intervention and analysis to really make sense of all the data you're getting out of the process mining tool?
No, it's very powerful. And you get a number of different views. So you can see how close to automated process you could be. You can still see down to which vendor, which user, which actually invoice, right down to the bottom level to be able to see where there's gaps or inconsistencies. Yeah.
Very interesting. Okay. And then do you have maybe one or two examples of a case study of where you've seen this process mining tool used and sort of what you measured, what came out of it, what you found, what you discovered as a result? Could you share an example of that with us?
Yeah, there's one that recently I were involved in, and that was following up after an S4 deployment had failed. And so they were looking at a number of different instances or facilities that they had, and they were trying to identify why they couldn't get consistent process. So they put in the process mining tool, looked at each of the instances, and realized that all 17 instances were actually doing the process a different way, even though S4 had a centralized single process that they had rolled out. And so from there, you could actually look back and improve the process that they're actually using and start to align users to the process. And I think that's the key thing, was that users could actually see the value of doing the process in a consistent way. And so that's the real benefit that this particular case study came with. And following on now, they've actually built some business rules into the process mining, and that allows them to be able to maintain consistency across all 17 of those instances. So so that's probably the flow-on effect, and you can continually then measure how well your performances are going across all of your processes. So it's not a sort of just a let's look at it at the beginning. It's something that you can use and monitor all the way through.
Really interesting. So it's not necessarily just as part of of an initial implementation, right? You said in this case it was a S4 HANA failure, and they had 17 instances, lots of different ways of doing things. But could you also just use it if I'm fairly happy with my systems, or I'm not really thinking about necessarily replacing all my systems, but I just want to get more out of them? Can I use it in that context too, or is it meant for more of a new system deployment?
No, definitely. And I think that with the pressure of people going, let's go to a new system, one of the first steps they should look at is how well do we do our processes with our old system? Because when I move to the new system, I want to have pretty consistent process. So what I build in the technology platform is closer to what we want is smooth, simplified process. Whereas if we don't do that at the beginning, then the change effort is big, adoption is harder, and it just makes it much harder to actually roll out a total deployment program.
Right. Yeah. It makes total sense. And I just want to acknowledge there are a lot of questions coming in on LinkedIn. I just saw someone commented, I think Eric's ignoring us. So I just want you to know if you're on LinkedIn, we'll get to your questions in just a moment. And there's actually a ton of them there. But let me get some of the basic questions out of the way here, and then we'll dive into the real questions that the audience has here. So you talked a little bit about the benefits of process mining. Maybe we'll just come back to that real quickly. You said that usually you can justify any sort of time and cost investment in process mining via the improvements and the potential improvements you can make as a result. Is that a fair summary?
It is, because many times the things that you uncover are very costly in loss of value in your organization. And so just by rectifying those and knowing where the problem is, so you focus right in on it, it's not a very costly exercise to actually overcome those. But the return is quite high. Right.
Yeah. What's super interesting too is as you're describing this whole process mining tool and the approach and the methodology, and even in the case study you described, it's a fascinating way to augment that traditional way of getting in a conference room and sort of mapping out our processes end to end, and really giving you some quantitative, real data that's objective. It's not infused with my opinion or internal politics or the fear of offending someone or just a misunderstanding of what's actually happening in reality. It's very fact and data based, it sounds like, compared
to... It is, and it's funny that you say that, because we're working with a client at the moment, and we're mapping out all of the workshops that we're actually going to use in the evaluation process. And they're saying, but they're very short workshops. There's no day workshops, and we've got everybody involved, and we're putting post-it notes on the wall. It's very factual in what you're doing, and it's like an evolution process to get people understanding what's happening, and then what should we do about it? Because the thinking is different then. And so the change process is different because you're working with real life as against assumption or people's opinion or those sorts of things. So it's a whole different framework of getting the improvement.
Yeah, just think of all the times that you, myself, anyone else on the third stage team, or any consultant out there has been in a conference room and just talking about processes, and you get these perceptions like, oh yeah, we have a very common process for this or that, or they say, oh yeah, that's a broken process, or we don't have a consistent way of doing things. That's still very subjective and qualitative, but if you had actual data to back that or refute it, you could say, well, actually, here's what's really happening. And this isn't, again, it's not an opinion, it's fact of what's actually happening. So I imagine it's very eye-opening to a lot of organizations.
It is. And it stops that, that whole thing of we don't agree with that, or that's not right. Here it is. It's quite clear.
Yeah. We could maybe disagree or analyze what the cause is. Why is it showing that? But it's hard to refute the data that actually comes out of that because it is reality.
And some people find it refreshing because they've been stuck with processes that can't work properly because maybe master data isn't right, or no one set up the vendor prior, or there's a whole range of things that cause the issues, and they've had to work with that before and be forced to actually have a simple process. But those workarounds have been what they need to actually even get the process out, get it working. So,
right, very interesting. And then maybe I'll ask this one more question I've got, and then I'm going to shift gears. We've got questions coming in from multiple places here. We're getting bombarded, and I don't want people to abandon the live stream because I'm not getting to their questions. But one last thing I'll ask, just from my perspective, is when you think about process mining and organizational change management, and bear with me because I know and the audience may not, though, but I cannot for the life of me get through a discussion without somehow tracing it back to change management. So I'm going to do it again here. How does process mining or how does process mining potentially help from a change management perspective, and if so, how?
Well, if people can understand the why, and I often see this in change management, is the resistance is because people don't understand why they're doing or what they need to do. And so if you understand the why, the change effort becomes more of a, we are happy to make this change. And so it's almost like I call it a push, we're pushing to get these process improvements. Whereas you as the change person aren't pushing them, they're pulling you along. So that's the difference with the change piece. And you can see small pieces of change improvement, which ends up to be big change overall. So you can quantify your change value. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it creates a clear story and a clear burning platform for change. You can point specifically to real issues and real problems that are being addressed as a result of
That's right. And not normally where we're looking at everything. Change program and digital transformation is quite large. You can actually pull bits off, rectify that, and you get incremental benefit as you go. So so it's more manageable. Yeah.
Right. Well, great. Well, let me shift gears here and get to some of the audience questions, and I've got some more we'll get to as well later on. But first of all, we've got a very diverse audience here today. We've got people from just a few examples: San Francisco, Ukraine, Pakistan, India, Norway, South Africa, Venezuela. So a lot of different places. Spain. Someone on Crowdcast is on Spain. One of our frequent attendees is from there. In fact, his comment is, an old Spanish dog is back to learn new tricks. So I hope we're teaching him some new tricks here in this discussion. So first question from Rahendra on LinkedIn asked the question of, could you name some of the process mining tools that are out there? Just some examples of some of the leading tools.
There's two. One is called Celonis, which is probably the leading tool. And the second one is one that was recently purchased by SAP, and that's called Signavio. And both of them are fundamentally similar. Celonis is probably the leader in the market and probably has the biggest market share. Yeah.
Okay. Now, just as a follow-up question to that one, to Rahendra's question, are these tools, you mentioned SAP has acquired Signavio. If I'm using Signavio or any other process mining tool, whether it's Celonis or anything else, is it technology agnostic? Can I use it with any other tool? Or if I'm using Signavio, is that only going to work with SAP because SAP owns it?
No, they are technology agnostic. SAP bought it because of, I think, many of the challenges of S4 and realizing there's lots of process change. And so they're probably trying to leverage that as part of their rollout program or future state for S4 deployments.
Right. And just to add to the Celonis comment, that's a tool that we use, and you've helped us sort of forge that relationship and that use of that tool in our consulting methodology at Third Stage Consulting, right?
Yeah, that's right. We're working with clients now, so and getting some really great results.
Yeah, that's very cool. I'll be honest, I didn't know what process mining was until I, started talking to you about it probably a year ago or whatever it was. So
there's two parts to it, I guess. is the fact there's the tool, but there's also what you do with that tool. And in the early days, organizations would get it. The IT people would maybe plug it in, and because you didn't have that end-to-end view, it didn't really go anywhere. And so applying a framework where you actually have end-to-end view focus and the improvement and change piece in there, that's where your value comes from.
Right. Okay. I'll try to take a stab at this question here. This is from Hostiensen. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing it. It's on LinkedIn. And the question is, I guess process mining allows one to understand how processes are reflected in the systems, so you can't mine off line processes. Is that true? Or does that question make sense to you? I'm not sure that I personally don't understand that question. Maybe you do.
I think he's probably talking about organizations that work a lot off system. And so people say, well, how can you process mine if that's the case? But what you pick up is you always have to have a system of record. And so when you're going in and out of the system, you start to see the time delays, and you can piece together where the problems are. Many times people will snap it out in the spreadsheet and then do some process analyses and then put a number back in the ERP. And the problem with that is that number real, or are we letting the ERP do what it's meant to do? It's meant to be a finance tool. It's meant to be a asset management tool. It's meant to be something that allows those processes and financial records to be kept as a source of truth. And when we don't do that, the value of ERP is diminished. And so you can pick that up quite quickly.
Interesting. So maybe to paraphrase or make sure we're addressing the question or the point here. So if I'm an end user and we've got a process mining tool running in the background, I'm in SAP or Oracle or whatever my ERP system is. I pull some data out of it. I go to my spreadsheet. I do whatever I'm going to do, and then I come back and enter some data as a result of my analysis or manipulation in a spreadsheet. The process mining tool isn't going to know what I did in the spreadsheet outside the system, but it's going to see that there was a lag there. And then I would drill into that. So I could drill in and say, okay, why is there such a gap here? And then I would analyze that, get to the root cause, and find that, it's because people are going and doing stuff in spreadsheets or manipulating the data or going to other third-party sources to get the data they need. Is that sort of
that's exactly it? Yeah, that's what you find. Yep.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Another question. This is a question from Robert Speller on LinkedIn. He says, does this work like a GUI between apps?
Interesting. Between modules, it works. Yeah, so you can actually pick up the tables in the background that might be a finance. You might have some asset management. You might have those sort of things. So you can actually link those tables together to drive your end-to-end process. So it sits across apps and it works off the application layer.
Okay, great. There's a really good question here from Rahendra again on LinkedIn. I'm going to come back to that in a second because it's a pretty meaty question, and there's someone that's waiting or that asked a question a while back here on Crowdcast. And this question is from Karen on Crowdcast, and she says, how can users be doing something 17 different ways in a newly installed S4HANA system? Which actually I was wondering that same thing. Can you give some examples of how that's possible?
Well, it's how they source their materials. It might be the way they have their materials catalogued. It could be the types of vendors they buy for. And so if you think that's a centralized purchasing solution they put in place, and if they're buying from all of the vendors outside the centralized system, where there's better pricing, there's contract agreements, there's those sorts of things, that's where the variances lie in that particular process. It was a supply chain, and it was a centralized supply chain, and so they really didn't get centralization. They just got everybody still doing everything their way.
Interesting. So a lot of companies in S4HANA is probably a good example or a good reference point for a type of ERP system that a lot of organizations typically implement because they want a certain amount of standardization and common business processes across the organization. So if I'm a CIO or a project team member involved in a transformation, and I'm implementing any ERP system, and I say, hey, I've got a single instance of the software, so it's not like I've got different variations of the software. It's one instance we're using across the globe, and I didn't customize. I'm using commercial off-the-shelf functionality. I just did some light configuration. What you're saying is it's still possible that even in that environment, you could still have multiple variations of how you use the system. So it's, in other words, it's not going to box in all the users into a certain process flow necessarily.
That's right. And you uncovered probably the big problem when it comes to rolling out something like an S4, in the sense that it has the capability to do it. But many times people, the SI looks at it as being, what do you call it, a level 3, level 4 process is what they start with. But they never get down to the detail of how people actually do that in the business. And so you might find there's people who are creating invoices or having invoices come in before they actually get a purchase order. They might have go out and don't even get an invoice and just pay it on a credit card. So there's all of those sorts of things that can happen that S4 in a rollout stage doesn't really look at, because it doesn't get down to that level. And whereas this allows you to be able to identify all right the way down. So are you using a credit card? Are you getting a purchase rec? Have you had to change the price? And so that's where that consistency starts to drive back into the process. And that's where you get performance out of your technology platform, instead of just this assumed level 3 process that many organizations start with. And they don't actually apply to the business context or to the operating model. And I hark back to the operating model, but it's understanding how we operate as an organization, and then what processes, how we conduct those processes.
Interesting. So I don't know why that question and answer triggered this thought, but if I'm a internal auditor and I'm concerned about controls and risk, or either just in general, or because maybe we need to be Sarbanes-Oxley compliant if we're a U.S.-based public company, or we have other regulatory controls we need to have in place depending on where we're based in the world. Is this something that could help with that too? Maybe identify where there's control issues, or not necessarily inefficiency or process breakdown or variation, but more of a breakdown in the controls and security of the system?
Yeah, the early adoption of the tools like Celonis was for that, was actually to audit and trace, to be able to get reporting compliance, and some auditors who were specialized auditors could identify where there wasn't controls within certain processes. So it's evolved since then, and process mining's only been around for probably 5 or 6 years. So it's not been around a long time, but it's really evolving very quickly.
Interesting. Okay. So the question that I wanted to get to here, in addition to some funny comments here, what about you sort of did this. This is similar to the question I asked you, but maybe we could go into it a little deeper, or maybe pick a different example. But the question here is from Rahendra on LinkedIn, and it says, could you share a process flow example and dashboard generated by the process mining tool? I suppose we probably can't show you a dashboard right now on the fly, but could you maybe walk through a process flow that you might analyze, and sort of where the process mining tool might collect different pieces along the way? Is that something you could think of a good example we could verbally talk through?
Yeah, or procure to pay is probably a good one, because most people understand it and most people buy things in their organization. The process, I suppose, that we look at is aligned to what our process is. So you might find there's certain steps or workflows that we actually have as an organization. When you do the evaluation, you start to see where those various points of the workflows touch. And so you might say there's an approval level where someone's got to approve expenditure. And so you can see the time it takes for that, or you can see if there's processes where you need to change the price on what you're purchase ordering after you've already got quotes and you've been through that process. Or you might find that you get to the end where the material hasn't been supplied, yet you've received an invoice, or there's not a goods receipt in place. And so you can pick up all of those areas or those steps that might not follow this standard process. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that's super helpful. Let's see. This one's from Liam on LinkedIn, and his question is, if a user is manually converting a system created by, if a user is manually converting system created requisition to an order, could you see if they are doing any value add in that process? Would the process mining suggest to use an automated purchase order conversion function?
Yeah, and that's one of the interesting things that are evolving out of this, is that many times, especially even in the goods receipt place, is that if you've got an invoice and it matches what your purchase order is, then you should be able to three-way match and automate that. And the same thing when it comes to purchasing. If you've then got vendor agreements where you've got set pricing schedules, if that pricing schedule comes in and it matches with what your purchase order is, you can automatically create that purchase order. So there's a lot of flexibility when it comes to getting consistency and automation as part of your process when you understand what the inputs are to actually create that.
Right. Now, what about if I'm an organization that is thinking about my digital strategy for the next 3, 5, 10 years or whatever? Maybe I'm thinking about an ERP system, or maybe I'm not sure and I just want to evaluate sort of what my current lay of the land is and what my future state might look like in terms of new technologies, processes, people changes, all that good stuff. How can a process mining tool and approach get us started on that journey, or how could it provide input into that digital strategy and planning journey?
Well, it's interesting because your organization has processes anyway. It's the way it conducts its business. And so by improving and getting consistency in that space, you have the ability to look at any different technology platform that you might be able to implement, because they follow a sort of standard linear process. We as organizations like to complicate that. And so we'll put different workflows or different approval steps. But it allows us to have clarity of that. So when we actually go to the solution integrator to actually build our platform, we go maybe not from vanilla, but we put in those steps, but we're not really customizing. Whereas the problem is if we don't do that and we've got a lot of inconsistent processes, we find ourselves at the design stage trying to accommodate all of those inconsistencies, and that's where we get a lot of customization of process and hard to close design and all those sort of things. So it's a really good step to get us consistent in our process. And when you look at a lot of organizations that are disruptors, the one thing you can point on is that they've perfected their process to be consistent. So companies like Uber and those sort of companies where, they're dealing with clients and they're processing orders and those sort of things, it's done consistently no matter where you are across the world. And they can monitor that. And so that's their power, that's their strength, but how they make a difference. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like, when you look at organizations, clients we work with at third stage, a lot of them are struggling with how do we scale. We've grown to a certain point and now we're kind of hitting a ceiling where we can't scale to that next level. And a lot of times it's because of inconsistent or broken processes. And what you're saying, it sounds like this approach or this tool set can help identify, where are those scalability issues and where are those variations and the breakdowns that we need to kind of create a common operating model so that we can get to that next level. That's
right. And it also allows business units to actually work within an end-to-end process environment. Many times we have, as a business unit, I do it this way, and then maybe accounts payable picks it up and they've got to then deal with whatever happened throughout that my way type thing. Whereas if you actually get it where they're all doing their piece in that puzzle, then you find that, the value comes, that scalability happens, the automation opportunities come out of it.
Right. And then back to the, sort of that digital strategy question I had, or maybe a follow-up there. It also sounds like if I'm not sure, you talked about going to your system integrator and providing inputs that'll help with the actual implementation. But even if we back up earlier than that, if I don't even know if I'm ready for an ERP system or CRM or HCM or any other technology, it seems like this would be an important diagnostic or an important input to help me understand, where exactly are the opportunities for improvement? What are my priorities, as far as what parts of my business are the most broken or ripe for opportunity? Is that true? Or could you see that being used, or have we used that with clients on helping define a digital strategy and a path forward?
Well, it's interesting because some organizations are told by a vendor, you need to upgrade your technology. Whereas when you actually look at it from the process mining perspective, you actually go, well, if we get our processes right, I wouldn't need to change that. I can actually be very efficient in what I do and put off that decision to a time where I, as an organization, are ready, or I find a technology that really suits me ideally. Whereas instead of just going and saying, well, it's time to update, let's put something in. This way you can actually really strategize about where your uniqueness in the way you do your business, and then put a technology in that really aligns with that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. I think a lot of organizations feel like they have to do something now because their vendors are telling them, "Hey, we're going to sunset this product in 2025 or whatever the year is." And this gives you sort of more. It equips you with information and knowledge that is really power in this whole decision making process, to where you can make a educated, informed decision on what you do or don't do, or where your priorities might be, and where you really do need technology upgrades or improvements versus maybe not.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Over the years, you go in and you do a major deployment, but you're taking out a technology that people say isn't very good, it doesn't work very well, we've got all these pain points, and then you look at what you roll out, you end up with the same pain points as you had before. If you'd fixed what you had before, far less cheaper, and you'd get the same benefit, but no one could see what those pain points were. And I think now there's the opportunity to be able to see that.
Yeah. And just going back to your example of the 17 ways of doing a process within S/4HANA, if that were true before you implemented a new ERP system, you had 17 different ways of doing things, and you didn't fix that, you're just going to put in new technology, and you're probably going to keep doing things 17 different ways, even with a more advanced system. It's just going to be a more advanced way of doing 17 things.
And that's what happened. Yeah. And this allows you to be able to put in best of breed. So because you can go cross module or cross platform or cross vendor solution, you can actually have a CRM from one company, and you can have a ERP from another, and you can have a mobility device from another, and you can link those to whether architecturally how they should actually go, to work together.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, super interesting. And then, of course, building your business case too. If you're thinking about a digital transformation, or you're trying to figure out, is the ROI there? Am I going to get a good cost benefit out of this investment or potential investment in technology? This gives you some really good quantitative, real metrics. So this isn't just, like a lot of times software vendors will say, oh, you can save 50% on your inventory and 25% of your G&A costs if you implement our technology. Well, who knows if that's real or not? It's probably not real even if it's a real average, it's probably not real to you as an organization. But this gives you actual real data you can use to build a business case too, I would think.
That's exactly right. And that's the real benefit, because you can say, well, if I'm spending X amount of millions of dollars to put in a platform, I can see that I'm going to get this improvement, and I can bank that improvement because I can watch that improvement happen and I can measure that improvement. And so that's the powerful thing, is that benefits realization in the past was very hard to measure, and whereas today you can measure it right down to the last dollar.
Right. Yeah. Very interesting. So another question here from a couple more questions here on LinkedIn. Should we expect this one is from Rahendra as well? Thank you for all the great questions, Rahendra. These are really good. Should we not expect modern ERPs have built-in process mining tools, at least at some level? Have you seen that yet, where ERP systems or any sort of enterprise technology has a process mining tool built in, or are these truly still standalone products for the time being?
Well, I think the software vendors are starting to see the need, hence the reason that Signavio was actually bought by SAP. originally when Celonis started, SAP offered selling Celonis licenses for their clients to be able to use the system. So they see the value, but at this stage, it's probably one of those areas that they see it as a diversion for their platform or solution. But I think in the future, there's going to be a lot more of process mining, process evaluation that they will incorporate into their deployment of new solutions. SAP is definitely going that way, and it's probably been their Achilles heel in this S4 world, because that's the challenge. People are going, well, I need to actually get my processes right to get the benefits out of S4, and there hasn't really been a good mechanism to be able to do that, and that's the real problem with a lot of these deployments, where they don't get the value in the long term.
Yeah, and I would think the software vendors have bigger fish to fry in the next few years, just trying to convert all their legacy customers over to cloud systems and trying to push as many of them as they can to convert to cloud. But once we get past through this, what I think of as sort of version 2.0 of Y2K, it's like Y2K all over again. Now everyone's sort of rushing to get to the cloud now. Once we get through that, and the IT software sales sort of plateau off as a result of that, I would imagine this might be an area that would be ripe for getting the holdouts to, giving them a good data to help the holdouts convert to cloud or to sell them additional software. So I would think eventually ERP vendors might be well suited to have these tools built in.
I think they will. And at the moment, like you say, the vendors are grappling with that change of code from, the old way of on-premise to on-cloud, and many are still immature in that space. And so there's a lot of focus in their space to try and get the leverage of the new way that the platform should operate and depart away from the old on-premise view or code that they would have had in the past. Still, there's a lot of immaturity in that space, even in the cloud area. And when we actually have SaaS solutions, the function that they have in there is quite limited. And that's a big gap for the major players in the ERP space, at least.
Right. Great. This is actually a really good question. This is from Liam on LinkedIn. And actually, I'm glad he asked this, because I was trying to think of something along these lines. I was thinking about data privacy, but he actually comes at it from a better angle, which is, could you have a worker's revolt on your hands because they view process mining as surveillance software? So is this sort of a Big Brother dystopian sort of situation that could have a negative ramification? Have you seen that at all in organizations?
Well, it's interesting, because when you're trying to sell the concept, if you aren't at the right level in the business, that's what happens. People go, well, you're going to see what we do, and we've been doing it this way for so long. We're very protective of that. So not necessarily the revolt, but resistance for sure. When you get in at the level where, your executive level, and they start to see the value and how they can actually drive that value in their business and get consistency, and really also asking their people to do is to do the process as it needs to be done, not workarounds and those sort of things, then it's not really Big Brother telling you what to do. It's just saying, well, here's the process we've defined. If you did it that way, it'd be great for us. Yeah.
Right. Does process mining get down to that level of, for example, in the example you gave with the 17 different processes, if I'm individually doing something in one of those 17 different variations, is it get down to that level of granularity to see that Eric Kimberling is the problem? He's off doing his own thing over here, or he's taking too long to go through this process when we compare it to other people? Or is it more of a collective look?
Down to the who processed it, when you processed it, maybe how long you took to process it, whether you didn't process it. So it's got a lot of detail. Yeah.
Interesting. So to Liam's question or point, if you're at that level down lower in the organizations and you are a decision maker or have any input into this tool, you might say, well, let's not do that. That's not the kind of ability we necessarily want or need. But at the senior levels in the organization, you're probably going to want to see what's happening in reality in those different parts of the.
And it's a great tool, because when you bring new people in the organization, No one ever gets onboarded completely about how you should do a process. So they adopt maybe what they did the last organization. So this allows you to be able to look at it at that detail and then find training ways to be able to upskill that person to get the consistency. So many see it as a benefit for onboarding and maintaining consistency across their organization. So there is a positive to it. Yeah.
Interesting. Have you seen it used to the point yet where I might use data from the process mining tool to evaluate you as an employee, to evaluate you individually and your productivity and to give you coaching? And have you seen it at that level yet, or is it more from the analysis of just trying to figure out how do we fix processes in general? And have you
definitely from the coaching level, because especially when you roll out a major deployment and you want to be able to see if people are actually adopting the platform or the processes, it allows you to be able to go back to those people and say, well, we're noticing that this isn't being done the way we envisaged. You're doing it this way. Let us train you or let us coach you the better way. The other thing that really advanced process mining allows you to do, it will flag up, here's what you should do. So you can have business rules built into the process. So it will alert the user to say that in this case, you should be maybe offering this or processing this or, doing these sorts of things, which allow the organization to get the maximum benefit. So it might be bonuses. When you actually, if you pay early, you get a bonus. It alerts you or the user to actually go ahead and make those payments so that the company can retrieve those bonuses. So that's an example.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that use case before, or that intent or that purpose for using the tool. So just as a last question here, as we come up at the top of the hour here, what is the best place to start, or how does someone get started on a process mining initiative? I mean, what would you recommend to someone who's thinking about or intrigued by this whole concept of process mining?
I think one of the ways that I got involved in the early days when I was working in a functional role was I saw on YouTube a clip, and I looked at what process mining was, and then started to talk about, to my leaders, this would be a good opportunity, and start from that basis. It was one of those things. Knowledge is power, and you shouldn't be frightened of process mining. There's a lot more benefits to it than there is being frightened of it.
Yeah, it's super cool. I mean, it's just a different tool, and it addresses a need that's been there for so long. I think back to one of the very first comments you made at the very beginning of this discussion was that, instead of sitting in a conference room and talking about processes, you can now look at the data. You can still talk about the processes, but at least now you have data to support those discussions and to be able to guide and help you focus on maybe where you want to hone in and drill down and understand a little bit better. And it's fascinating that, in some ways, that it's taken this long to have a tool like this out there.
Yeah, and the growth of companies like Celonis has just been exponential growth. They call them a unicorn. So there's very few companies that grow as fast as from nothing. So process mining was not anything before, whereas in a very short time, it's now a really strong methodology that people are seeing the benefits for. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Good deal. Well, that makes total sense, and really appreciate having you on the show today, especially so early in the morning, your time in Australia. Thanks for being here, Wayne. Really appreciate it.
No, it's great. It's good to talk about a topic that you can tell I'm a bit passionate about.
Yes, and that's how I actually got interested by it. I mean, I'd always heard of process mining, or for a while now I've been hearing about it, but it was through you that I sort of got interested in it and intrigued by it as well. So it's cool to actually see it being used at our clients and talking with you more about it now. So thanks for that, and thanks to the audience too for all the great questions. We had some really good questions here today, and appreciate all those good points. And just remember, we're live every Friday at the same time on LinkedIn, YouTube, Crowdcast, and Twitter. We may eventually be on Facebook as well, but for now, those are the main platforms we're on. So be sure to check us out every Friday. If you have ideas for topics, we're always open to that. So feel free to reach out. And we'll also make these interviews. We take these interview segments and bake them into our weekly Transformation Ground Control podcast, which comes out every Wednesday. So keep an eye out for that. This interview will end up showing up in a future episode, along with other content that we package into those episodes. So be sure to check that out as well if you haven't already subscribed to that podcast. Check it out on YouTube. You can also check it out on any of the major podcast platforms like Amazon and Apple and Google and all those. So anyway, thanks everyone for being here today. I hope you all have a great weekend, and hope to see you next Friday here on our live stream. And thanks again, Wayne, for being here.
Great. Thank you very much. Enjoyed it.
All right. Thank you. Take care, guys. Bye.